Hi, everyone. My name is Leah Woods, and I am here with Roger Myers. Roger Myers is a full-time furniture maker, and I was interested to talk to you, Roger, because you have an interesting career and a trajectory into woodworking. You had a completely separate career for for a couple decades, and then you went back to school for woodworking. So I'm wondering if you could just kind of briefly explain, like, how did you get into woodworking and how did you make that that transition from one career to another?
Sure, no, I'll be glad to, Leah. And actually, it's probably 3 decades before I made the move full time into woodworking. I've always been interested in furniture making, and from the time I was just a lad, my father would work around the house and do projects. I always had some interest in it. And as I finished high school and began looking at colleges and everything else, I considered woodworking as a career path. But I don't know that I didn't have enough confidence in myself or confidence in the education system that was out there at the time. We're talking back in the early 70s now. So I took a more traditional path into college and ended up working for 30 years in manufacturing and engineering and finance, and ultimately retired in 2011. But I'd been making furniture as a hobby for most of those 30 years, sometimes more than other, but as I traveled a lot, it didn't allow as much time to get serious as I'd like to. It was really a relocation back to New Hampshire, from the Midwest back to New Hampshire, which was home, that really probably spurred me onto the woodworking more seriously, with involvement with the Guild of New Hampshire Woodworkers, a group that had started while I was out in the Midwest. And from there, I began to follow people in the New Hampshire Furniture Masters, which I'm very pleased to be a part of the organization right now. I got more involved and I began to see what was available. And when I retired, I had already made the decision when I retired to start making furniture full time. And that was going to be kind of it. I was just going to, set up shop at the house there and see what happens. And it was a visit down to Colonial Williamsburg to one of the Society of American Period Furniture Maker conferences that really caused such a dramatic change in my trajectory. I'd gone down with my wife. I've been going to this conference for years, but now that I was retired, my wife went down with me, and a couple of my friends that I'd known for years from North Bennet Street School were the keynote speakers at the conference. A couple of months after the conference, my wife said to me, "Have you ever thought about going to school, going back to North Bennet Street School?" And well, I thought that was a pretty nice idea, but I didn't think I'd get in. And I applied. I looked at a lot of different schools, and I applied to North Bennet, got in. And I think that's a really important aspect of it, is that my experience is, I've been learning woodworking for 30 plus years. But when I went into North Bennet Street, I kind of checked my knowledge at the door and went in with an open mind and said, just feed me. And if I could learn one thing every day, I considered that a success. And of course, I learned a lot more than one thing every day. And whether, I was one of the older students, certainly at North Bennet, there were people anywhere from their early 20s, and there was actually somebody older than me. But it was a tremendous 2-year experience. Not that you need to go to North Bennet, but the concept of always being able to learn something and to find places to increase your knowledge. Before that, I'd taken workshops. I'd studied carving with a few different people, and had some nice opportunities. But then I really took it serious. And so it's been a wonderful ride ever since then. I can't think of doing anything different. No regrets on the path that I chose to get here. Whether I should have started this 40 years ago. But as I tell people, for years I did what fed the family. Now I do what feeds the soul, and I love it every day.
Well, I think it's really impressive that you went back to school, to the North Bennet Street School, um, because to learn something, I mean, it sounds like you maybe had a lot of knowledge or even more knowledge than you thought you did when you started the program, but it takes a lot of courage to put yourself in a situation where you're sort of the newbie, and when you're not like in the age bracket of all the kids, quote unquote, who are coming in, did did you have any moments of hesitation where
Oh, absolutely. From the time I applied. Um, and it's really actually the second time that I kind of, I guess I'm a professional student in many ways, because I also had a similar experience in my professional career before I retired, when I went back for my MBA late in my career. And I entered an MBA program as one of the oldest students in the program as well, and very intimidated by the knowledge of the people around me. Um, but I think, and so I had the same experience at North Bennet. I'm there with people who are, really skilled designers, and I'm thinking back to when I was a child and I had a teacher that told me I couldn't draw, so everything I had done up until that point was pretty much straight lines. But I think you have to be willing to take the chance to try something new, to explore the creativity that's inside you. And I've had some wonderful mentors along the way. Um, I remember, hearing an expression from one of the furniture masters one time. A straight line is a wasted opportunity. And I'd been working with straight lines my entire woodworking experience up until that point, because I didn't think I could draw. I didn't think I could design. And now I come up with some, my favorite work is still probably work from the American federal period, but I'm also doing some very contemporary work with lots of curves and very original designs. And it opens up a part of my, I don't know, part of my experience that otherwise would have just been dormant. I'm really excited by it.
well, I think that's really interesting about the lines because some of the most beautiful pieces that I know of yours are your music stands. And they have lots of curves. And correct me if am wrong, but I think you do a coopered form that is the base of the music stand. Is that right?
Well, it looks to be Coopered. It's certainly a six-sided form, and it's very sculptural in form. And I do a few variations on it. And while it takes its influence in a lot of ways from the federal period, I've adapted it, and played with it a little bit. And yeah, there's very few straight lines on it, but yet it still has some very traditional look to it that would make it, at home in a house from 1820.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's really been a progression, and exciting to see what happens when you unleash that creativity, or let yourself play. Allow yourself to draw outside the lines.
So, what are some of your favorite kinds of projects to work on now?
Well, the easy answer would be whatever the client wants. Okay. But that's not no, that's not really the case. I try to do at least a couple of speculative pieces every year. And I've been doing a series the last couple of years, which has been received really well. Where the design influence actually comes from my corporate career when I used to travel to Hong Kong, and it's influenced by the architecture in Hong Kong, where many of the skyscrapers on the island, they have openings in the buildings, holes through the buildings. And I would look at this and I said, well, that's really strange. And it struck me in one of my trips. I asked about it, and I was told those are called dragon's gates. They were to allow the dragon to flow from the mountain to the sea. So I kind of filed that away, and following another piece of advice from one of the early furniture masters, Jerry Osgood, I made a little sketch of it. I started making little sketches, never knowing what I would do with them. And I was able to transfer some of those designs into furniture pieces that utilize those openings for display of artwork and so on. And they've been very well received. And that's an area I think I'm really exploring a lot more of, is to kind of blend the architectural world and some of the natural influences, and see what comes about.
I think that is so interesting, and I can completely relate to the idea of seeing something that you think is really interesting, like the Dragon's Gates, and like you said, filing it away. And I think that that's such an interesting moment when we see something and we know that for some reason it's interesting or important in some way, but don't know what to do with that information. And so
Absolutely. Yeah.
allowing the brain to kind of put it somewhere that allows you to remember it later. I think that that's I don't know how that works in the brain, but I think that
Mm.
that's really interesting to then be able to connect back with those visual images.
Well, Jerry would say, you could be walking through the woods and you could just see the shape of a branch or a leaf or a pattern on the floor of the forest, or just the way a stream curved, bent around a rock. And if you had a sketchbook and that was something that, you don't have to know what it's going to be, just sketch that shape down or that form down. And so I did that for quite a few years. Again, not thinking I could draw very well, but at least being able to capture the shapes. And of course, now, my I don't need to carry the sketchbook anymore, because if I see an interesting pattern or shape or something, usually I'll just grab my phone and take a quick picture of it. But you'll see lots of pictures that I take of patterns or geometric shapes or repetitions, because I'm also fascinated by geometric shapes, and there's something called tessellations that I'm playing with a lot right now. That I'm fascinated by how to incorporate some of that work into furniture design as well.
Can you briefly explain what tessellations are for anyone who doesn't understand?
I don't think it's possible to briefly explain tessellations, because I don't fully understand them. There's every time a new one is discovered, somebody gets really excited. I know that. They're mathematical geometric shapes that, for lack of a better word, they nest together, they fit together.
Like
Um,
in the shell and the sunflower and
Right. Yeah. And it's not. I'm also fascinated by things like the Fibonacci series and so on, which is really what those progressions are. But the tessellations are a little bit more, and it's kind of like a lot of Escher's work. The artwork where you would see things nesting together. So it's a way to again explore shape and geometry, and in a lot of the case of tessellations, straight lines, but in very interesting intersections with each other. And because I like to do a lot of inlay work, that really is something that I'm trying to find a way to blend it all together.
very cool. Well, my last question is, what are you working on right now, or what project do you have planned for the future?
Well, I'll be coming up with another one in my Dragon's Gate series, and that's still in the sketchbook. And I've got a couple of commissions I'm working with. I've got a client out in California who I've done a number of pieces for, and actually just got an email from him this week, and so we're beginning to exchange some sketches back and forth. And when you're working long distance like that, I'll do a design and I'll mock it up in a CAD program, a drawing program, and then do some quick renderings, send it on, and we can, even though the client's across the country from me, we can begin that exchange of ideas and come up with what he's looking for. And of course, there'll be more music stands in the future too. I'm not done with those. I'm still playing with that form.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for your time and explaining a little bit about your ideas and inspiration and work. This has been great.
My pleasure, Leah. Thank you.